You think your family will always stand by you, right? That's what I believed. I thought loyalty was something we never had to question. But one phone call shook that belief to its core. It came out of nowhere while I was sitting in my office, trying to finish a campaign for a client. My phone buzzed, and it was my lake house neighbor, Mr. Peterson. We weren't close, so hearing from him immediately made me pause. His voice was uneasy as he told me there were construction trucks and workers all over my property. He assumed I had hired them, but something in his tone told me he already suspected I hadn't. When I told him no work was authorized, he hesitated before sending me a picture. The moment I opened it, my stomach dropped so hard I felt lightheaded. There were the trucks, the workers, and in the middle of it, my parents, Carol and Frank, along with my brother Jason, directing everything like they owned the place. I froze. I wanted to believe there was an explanation, something I misunderstood. But that picture told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. This was betrayal, wrapped in entitlement and carried out by the people I had sacrificed so much for. I built my digital marketing agency from scratch, working late nights, skipping vacations, and grinding through setbacks. Because of that work, I was able to give my family things most people only dream of. I bought my parents a beautiful suburban home, completely mortgage-free. I covered Jason and Chloe's rent for years, so their kids could have a stable life. I helped with bills, emergencies, even holidays. Not once did I ask for anything back. Giving felt good. It felt right. And when I bought myself a quiet lake house, it wasn't a flex, it was peace. It was the one place in the world that was mine. I handed my parents a spare key, thinking if something ever happened, they could check in. I never imagined they'd use it to break my trust instead of protect it. The drive to the lake house felt like hours. My hands were shaking the whole way. When I stepped out of the car, I could hear drilling before I even reached the door. Then I walked inside, and my heart cracked. A whole wall had been ripped open. My living room was in ruins. Dust everywhere. My furniture pushed aside like trash. And my family? They weren't shocked. They weren't sorry. My mom actually smiled and said they were expanding the space so Jason's family could move in. My dad told me it was only fair because I already have more than I need. Jason chimed in, calling me selfish for being upset. In that moment, standing in a cloud of sawdust and lies, I realized something painful. Some people don't love you. They love what you do for them. I was halfway through reviewing a project in my office when my phone vibrated on the desk. I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen made me pause. It was Mr. Peterson, the man who lived near my lake house. We'd only spoken a couple of times, so him calling me during the workday felt strange. The moment I answered, I heard the uncertainty in his voice. He wasn't calling for small talk, he was worried. He told me there were construction trucks parked outside my place, along with a group of workers moving equipment around. He said it looked like a renovation was beginning and assumed I had arranged it. His tone made it clear he wasn't convinced of that himself. For a moment, I couldn't respond. My mind raced through every possibility, but nothing made sense. I told him I hadn't scheduled anything, and the silence that followed made my chest tighten. He apologized for disturbing me, but said he felt something was off and thought I should know. Before I could ask more, he said he had taken a picture just in case and would send it to me. A few seconds after the call ended, I heard the soft ping of a new message. I opened it instantly, and the image nearly knocked the air out of me. My driveway was filled with equipment, and workers were unloading tools like they were preparing for a full remodel. But what hit me harder than the trucks or the crew were the people standing with them. There clearly visible were my parents, Carol and Frank, and my brother Jason. They weren't confused or surprised. They were directing the workers, pointing, discussing plans, acting like everything belonged to them. My hands went cold. I stared at the photo, hoping I had misread something, but it was all there in plain sight. When Mr. Peterson mentioned a crew, I thought maybe a stranger had mixed up addresses or a company made a mistake. But seeing my own family orchestrating everything removed any doubt. They were doing this deliberately, and they hadn't told me a single word about it. My pulse thudded in my ears as I tried to process what I was looking at. I had given them trust, not permission to take over my property. The photo didn't show confusion or an emergency. It showed confidence, like they believed they had every right to act without me. Their faces weren't concerned. They looked comfortable, almost casual, as if directing work on someone else's home was normal for them. I sat in my chair, unable to move for a moment. I didn't feel anger at first. I felt a deep, sharp disbelief. It was the feeling you get when something you rely on suddenly cracks right under you. The lake house was the one place where I felt at peace, and now strangers were tearing into it while my own family supervised. The more I looked at the photo, the clearer it became that this wasn't a misunderstanding or a mistake I could shrug off. Whatever they were doing, they had planned it without me, knowing I would never approve it. And now I had to face the truth I didn't want to accept. The betrayal wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the people who were supposed to stand with me. That single picture changed everything. I drove to the lake house faster than I should have, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. My mind kept searching for some explanation that would make the photo make sense. Maybe they were confused. Maybe they misunderstood something. I tried to steady my breathing, but a heavy feeling sat in my chest the entire ride. By the time I reached the long road that led to the lake house, my stomach felt like it was twisting. As soon as I pulled into the driveway, any hope I had vanished. The quiet space I loved so much no longer looked peaceful. A large section of the outer wall had been ripped open. I could see straight into my living room from outside. Dust floated in the air, drifting through the gap like fog. Pieces of wood and broken drywall were scattered everywhere. My furniture was pushed into piles, as if it were junk someone planned to toss out. I stepped out of the car slowly, trying to take everything in. The sound of tools clanking stopped for a moment when a few workers noticed me, but they quickly went back to what they were doing. It was clear they had been told to keep going. I walked toward the house, my heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and growing anger. Then I saw them, my parents and Jason, standing near the torn wall, talking to one of the workers. None of them looked shocked to see me. They didn't rush over to explain. They didn't look guilty. They looked annoyed, as if my arrival was interrupting their project. My mother turned first. She smiled like everything was perfectly normal and said they were opening up the space. She explained it like she was sharing a fun surprise. She said Jason and his family needed more room, and the lake house was a perfect place for them. The casual tone in her voice hit harder than the sight of the damage. Before I could even speak, my father added that it was reasonable because I had plenty already. His voice carried no hesitation, no doubt. He spoke like someone who believed he was making a fair trade, my privacy for their comfort. Jason crossed his arms and looked at me like I was the problem. He said I was making a scene by showing up upset. He claimed I didn't understand how families should support each other. To him, everything happening around us was justified simply because they wanted it. I stood there, trying to control the emotions rising inside me. The dust-covered floor, the half-demolished wall, the loud machines. They were all overwhelming, but nothing compared to the cold certainty on their faces. They weren't confused. They weren't acting out of concern. They had made decisions about my home without me, and now they were trying to make me feel wrong for questioning them. What hurt the most was how easily they dismissed my feelings, as if I didn't matter at all in my own house. They were so focused on what they wanted that they didn't even pause to consider the harm they were causing. Their confidence, their excuses, their complete lack of respect. It was all so clear. Standing in that broken room, I realized something important. This wasn't just a bad choice or a misunderstanding. This was who they had become when they thought I wasn't watching. And now that I could see it plainly, everything inside me shifted. I didn't argue with them. There was no point. The more they tried to justify what they were doing, the clearer it became that nothing I said would change their minds. Instead of wasting my breath, I turned around and walked out of the ruined house. My footsteps on the dusty floor were the only sound I made. Keeping quiet wasn't weakness, it was control. I knew if I stayed even a minute longer, their excuses would only push me deeper into anger. I needed answers, not another fight, and I had a strong feeling about where to find them. Once I reached my car, I sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as I tried to steady myself. The photo, the torn wall, their behavior, it all pointed toward something planned. And if they were bold enough to tear apart my home, I feared they might have created paperwork to make it look official. That thought alone made my stomach tighten, but I pushed through it. I drove straight to the construction company, whose name I had spotted on one of the trucks. I knew I had to move fast before more damage was done. When I entered the office, the receptionist looked up, surprised by how tense I must have seemed. I asked to speak with whoever was in charge, and after a short wait, a man named Dave stepped out. He was the foreman, a practical-looking guy who clearly didn't expect trouble that day. I explained that work was being done on my property without my approval. He looked confused at first, insisting they had proper authorization. I told him to show me. He took me to his desk, opened a file folder, and pulled out the work order. My heartbeat picked up when I saw a document attached to it. It was a power of attorney form, supposedly giving permission for my father to oversee renovations on my behalf. At first glance, someone might think it looked valid. But the signature that was meant to be mine was poorly copied, the curves sloppy and uneven. Anyone who had ever seen my real signature would know it wasn't me. Dave's face shifted from confident to concerned. He slid the paper closer to me and asked if something was wrong. I didn't shout or accuse him. I simply took out my ID and the original deed to the lake house, placing both in front of him. The contrast between the real documents and the forged one was undeniable. His eyes widened slightly when he realized what he had been given to work with. He apologized immediately, saying he had no idea the paperwork was fake. I could tell he felt uneasy, knowing his crew had already started tearing into the house. He didn't try to defend the situation or delay the truth. As soon as he understood the property was mine alone and that I had never given permission, he made a call right there in front of me. He instructed his team to stop everything and leave the site at once. Hearing him give that order felt like the first small moment of relief I'd had since the phone call earlier that day. The damage was still there, the betrayal still fresh, but at least the destruction wouldn't continue. Walking out of that office, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't going to be solved with calm talks or family meetings. What they had done crossed a line that couldn't be ignored. And now, with the forged paper in my hand, the next steps were no longer emotional. They were legal. I drove straight to my lawyer's office the next morning. I didn't want the situation to drag on, and I knew I needed professional help before my emotions clouded my judgment. Eleanor Vance had been my attorney for years, and she was the kind of person who didn't sugarcoat anything. When I walked into her office, she took one look at my face and knew something serious had happened. We sat down, and I went through everything from start to finish. I told her about the sudden phone call, the state of the lake house, the behavior of my family, and the forged document the construction company had shown me. I also explained the long history of financial help I had given them, payments, housing, and support they had never once struggled for. Eleanor listened quietly, taking notes, occasionally shaking her head at the details. She didn't interrupt until I finished speaking. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair, her expression firm. She told me this wasn't simply a disagreement between relatives. What they had done counted as fraud because of the false authorization. The damage to the house was another serious issue. She made it clear that ignoring this would only encourage them to cross even larger boundaries in the future. Eleanor wasted no time. She called an assessor and arranged for them to examine the lake house as soon as possible. I agreed, knowing I needed an accurate report to move forward. Waiting for the results felt long, even though it only took a day. I kept thinking about how easily they had stepped over the line, and how calmly they had acted while tearing apart something I had built for myself. When the damage assessment finally arrived, Eleanor reviewed it with me. The report stated the cost to repair everything came to $18,000. Seeing the number written clearly on paper, made the situation feel even more real. It wasn't just emotional harm anymore. It was financial loss caused by people who believed they had the right to take control of my property. Eleanor looked at me and asked how I wanted to proceed. I didn't rush my answer, but the decision forming in my mind felt steady. I told her I wanted to pursue compensation for the repairs. They had caused the damage. They should pay for it. But I also realized something else needed to change. I had given them a home years earlier out of kindness, expecting nothing in return. Now that kindness had been twisted into entitlement. I took a slow breath and told Eleanor to prepare a formal eviction notice. She raised her eyebrows for a moment, not in doubt, but in acknowledgement of how big a step it was. I explained that my parents still lived in the house I bought for them, and after everything that had happened, I couldn't let them keep living there without consequences. Eleanor understood. She didn't question my reasoning. She simply nodded and said she would handle it. As she began drafting the documents, I felt a mix of sadness and strength settle over me. I wasn't acting out of anger anymore. I was protecting my boundaries they had ignored for far too long. When the eviction notice was officially filed, my family must have realized things were no longer in their control. Only 2 days later, I received a message from my mother asking me to come to their house because we need to talk as a family. The tone wasn't warm, it sounded like an order. Still, I went, not because I expected understanding, but because I wanted everything out in the open. When I walked into the living room, the scene felt strangely staged. They had placed a single chair in the center of the room, facing the three of them. My parents sat on the couch together, and Jason stood with his arms crossed, as if acting as some kind of guard. The air felt heavy, as though they had already decided what the conversation would look like, and I was simply there to be corrected. I took the chair without saying anything. My silence seemed to irritate them immediately. My father spoke first. His voice was firm, almost rehearsed. He said families were supposed to make sacrifices for one another, and that I was forgetting my role. He talked about duty and loyalty, twisting those words until they sounded like chains. He insisted I had overreacted and that I owed them patience. Before I could respond, my mother leaned forward, wiping her eyes dramatically. She said she had always supported me and that she couldn't believe I would punish them this way. She kept repeating that she had done everything out of love, as if that excused the choices they had made. Her tears came in waves, but they didn't match the coldness in her eyes. Jason stepped in next, pacing like he was building momentum. He said I was being unreasonable and that I needed to stop taking things so personally. He insisted the renovations were a good idea and that I was creating problems where none existed. He kept telling me to be mature and let things continue, as if my home being torn apart was some small inconvenience. His tone made it clear he wasn't asking, he was demanding. Through all of this, I stayed steady. I listened to every word, refusing to break the calm they expected me to lose. They wanted me emotional so they could twist the blame. Instead, I kept my composure, even as they tried to rewrite everything that had happened. When they finally paused, waiting for me to give in, I reached into my bag. I pulled out the folder Eleanor had prepared. I didn't say anything dramatic. I simply placed the damage report on the coffee table. The bold print $180,000 was instantly visible. Their voices fell quiet. Then, right beside it, I set down the eviction notice. My father's face drained of color. My mother's tears stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. Jason's jaw tightened, his confidence slipping. None of them reached for the papers. They just stared at them like they were something dangerous. I didn't raise my voice or argue. I let the document speak for me. These were not threats. They were facts, consequences of choices they had made without thinking about anyone but themselves. Sitting there, watching their expressions shift from certainty to shock, I realized something important. For the first time, they were being forced to see the reality they tried so hard to ignore. And I wasn't shrinking or apologizing. I was simply standing my ground, firmly and quietly, exactly where I needed to be. When I dropped the truth on them, the whole room snapped like a stretched wire. My father jumped up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. His face went red, then purple, like he couldn't believe I had finally said the one thing he never expected to hear. "You can't evict us from our own home," he shouted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "It's not your home," I told him. "It's mine. It has always been mine." For a moment, the room went silent, not calm, just stunned. My mother blinked at me like she didn't understand the language I was speaking. Jason froze with his mouth half open, as if waiting for someone to tell him I was joking. But I wasn't joking. I was done. I told them the eviction notice was already submitted. I told them the dates were final. And then, before they could fire off another round of excuses, I made everything even clearer. "I've also stopped every payment I've been covering," I said. My mother gasped like I had taken the roof off the house. Jason's eyes filled instantly, the way they always did when money was mentioned. My father slammed his hand on the table, but I didn't flinch. I laid out each expense with steady words. No anger, no guilt, no apology. Their car repairs. Their getaways. Their credit card emergencies. Jason's rent, which I had paid for months while he partied through every job he was given. Their utilities. Their groceries during the months they claimed they were struggling. Even though I later found out they were buying new furniture and going on weekend trips without telling me. Every line I spoke hit them harder than the last. My mother started crying. Jason tried to argue, but he had no ground to stand on. My father kept insisting I owed them because they were family. But every sentence he threw at me sounded smaller than the one before. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to make them understand anymore. I had spent years trying, and all it ever brought me was exhaustion. When I finished, I stood up. No dramatic speech, no final insult, no wish for them to change. Just a simple choice, my peace or their chaos. I wasn't choosing chaos anymore. I walked to the door while their voices tangled behind me. Anger, crying, shock, denial, all collapsing into each other. No one followed. They were too busy falling apart. I stepped outside, and the air felt different. Lighter. Real. Before leaving, I looked back just long enough to close the door. Not gently, not harshly, just firmly, the way you end something that should have ended a long time ago. It wasn't just a door closing. It was the last moment of a life where I kept sacrificing myself for people who never gave anything back. And I didn't regret it for a second. When I blocked their numbers, I thought the noise would finally end. But Chloe, my sister-in-law, wasn't ready to let things quiet down. Instead of calling me directly, she jumped onto a local community forum and wrote a dramatic post about how I was heartlessly throwing my poor, aging parents into the streets. She made me sound like some unstable villain who enjoyed hurting people. Within hours, strangers were sending me long paragraphs about how ashamed I should be. Some called me selfish, some called me spoiled, and some didn't even bother to be polite. Extended relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had plenty to say about family loyalty. None of them bothered to ask me what actually happened. They just believed the saddest story they saw online. At first, I felt that old, familiar pressure settling on my shoulders. The kind that used to make me explain myself over and over just to keep the peace. But this time I didn't shrink. I didn't hide. I didn't apologize for something I didn't do. If they wanted a story, I was finally ready to give them the real one. I logged into the same forum and typed slowly, making sure every word was clear. No emotion, no insults, just the truth. I posted a photo of the property deed with my name printed on it. Then I added screenshots of the forged signatures they had used to access accounts behind my back. I attached bank records showing every bill, every transfer, every emergency payment I had covered without ever asking for anything in return. There was no room for debate. The proof spoke louder than anything I could have said. The comments shifted almost instantly. People who had been calling me a monster a few hours earlier were suddenly silent. Others started asking Chloe and my parents why they had lied. A few apologized to me, but I didn't need that. I just wanted the truth out where everyone could see it. Then the entire thread turned on them. The The same online mob that had attacked me was now demanding answers from them. Some called out the forged documents. Others pointed out how they had manipulated public sympathy. More people questioned why a helpless elderly couple had been taking vacations, buying expensive items, and letting me pay for their adult son's rent. Chloe deleted her original post, but it was too late. Screenshots were already circulating. People saw exactly what had been happening, and there was no way for my family to twist it anymore. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. Not because people were suddenly on my side, but because I had finally chosen to speak without fear. Once everything settled, I logged out and put my phone away. I didn't check the replies. I didn't follow the arguments. I didn't need to. The truth was out there now. And once the truth lands, it doesn't disappear. They didn't disappear quietly. Once the truth spread online and their excuses stopped working, my family shifted from pretending to be victims to forcing themselves into my space. They showed up at the entrance of my apartment building, trying to get past security by shouting my name, insisting I come down and face them. I stayed inside. I had already given them too much of my life, and I wasn't opening the door to another performance. The building staff followed my instructions without hesitation. Whenever my family tried to push their way in, they were escorted back outside. I watched it all through the security app, not out of fear, but to remind myself that keeping my distance was the right decision. When they realized they couldn't reach me directly, they started leaving notes with the front desk. At first, the messages were full of apologies and long explanations about how they never meant harm. The next batch was completely different. Short, sharp threats about taking me to court or forcing me to listen. None of it shook me. I forwarded every note to my lawyer, Eleanor Vance. She drafted a single, concise response and sent it to them through certified mail. It explained in the calmest legal language possible what would happen if they attempted to sue me. The letter listed the potential charges they could face for forgery, including the penalties and jail time. After that, the notes stopped. The attempts to show up at my building stopped. The sudden silence was louder than any argument they had ever thrown at me. As the eviction deadline approached, I expected one last scene, some dramatic plea or angry confrontation. But instead, my bank app pinged one morning with a new deposit. It was the exact amount of the property damage assessment, $18,000. The transfer came from my father's account. There was no message attached, no apology, no explanation, just the payment. That was how I knew it was over. Not because they understood what they had done, but because they had run out of options. Paying was the only move they had left. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I didn't send anything back. I simply forwarded the confirmation to Eleanor and let her handle the final steps of the eviction process. For so long, my family operated on the belief that I would always cave if they pushed hard enough. They depended on guilt, pressure, and manipulation to keep me in line. But now, faced with real consequences, they finally backed down. Standing in my quiet apartment, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. There was no triumph in their surrender, only relief. They could no longer touch my life, my home, or my peace. And for the first time, I knew that choosing myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. On the morning they were scheduled to leave, I drove past the house I once gifted my parents. I didn't pull into the driveway or try to talk to them. I parked far enough away that they couldn't see me. From that distance, I watched movers pack their things into a truck. There was no anger left in me, just a heavy sadness for the version of family I used to believe in. The people standing on that porch were strangers wearing familiar faces. The family I thought I had never truly existed. I didn't stay long. There was nothing to say and nothing to fix. As soon as the movers closed the truck door, I drove away and didn't look back. That chapter had already ended. Seeing it in motion only confirmed what my heart already knew. A week later, I listed the house for rent. I wasn't sure how long it would take to find the right tenants, but within days, a young couple with steady jobs and a baby on the way reached out. They were polite, prepared, and respectful. 3 things I rarely received from my own family. When I handed them the keys, I felt a quiet relief. What once felt like a weight now felt like a smart, stable investment. Turning that house into a source of income felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me. With that done, I turned my attention to the lake house. The repairs were finally complete. The damaged wall had been rebuilt, the dust cleared, and the space restored. It looked the same as before, but it didn't feel the same to me. It felt stronger. Maybe because I was stronger, too. I had every lock changed. The locksmith handed me the new keys, and without hesitation, I dropped the old spare keys into a metal bin and watched them melt under the shop's disposal system. It felt symbolic, like removing the last open door my family could use against me. When I walked back into the lake house, the quiet wrapped around me like a warm blanket. For the first time in a long while, the space felt safe again. The betrayal had shaken me to my core, but surviving it taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn. Love without boundaries becomes a weapon others can use. Letting them go wasn't revenge, it was freedom. And standing in my home, surrounded by peace I rebuilt myself, I finally felt it. Do you think I was right to walk away and finally protect my peace, or should I have given them one more chance? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications.